All right. Thanks for staying for the last talk. Do we have the slides? Okay, great. Yeah. Hi everyone. I'm Danning Sui. I'm data scientist from Flashbots. Here I'm gonna bring a review of like the data for the state of markets related to DEX, MEV, and order flow. Here's an agenda of the bullets. We'll review like basically what's the structure of the DEX market look like and who is the king of the order flow today. Who has the most basically front-end user adoption. And then a trend about how the order flow market is getting more and more private, getting commoditized. And then we have a study to show how we compare the execution quality across different solver decks and analyze a few of the use cases for the DEX trading space. And lastly, I want to highlight a study we just announced recently about analyzing the L2 MEV. So here is a diagram that I always use, but it's pretty useful as a historical view of how DeFi trading has evolved on Ethereum particularly. So starting from 2016, 2017, when Ethereum just came out, mostly it was naive type of order book DEX started, where user can submit a limit order, become a maker, and you can be a taker as well. And then there will be a relayer that's matching the orders in the order book. But it's highly gas inefficient to list all these orders on chain, cancel them on chain, and also it's not very efficient to like matching the orders. The liquidity is not so efficient. And so later on, when Uniswap came out with the AMM design, it kind of really solved the liquidity issue where everybody just put the assets in a pool and the price is defined by a curve. And along with more and more, AMM are forking Uniswap's liquidity pool. People then see, okay, now the liquidity is fragmented again. We kind of have to need to aggregate them. So now like 0x and 1inch, they all transitioned towards a DEX aggregator. And that's when they started to introduce, not only order book and AMM, and also professional market makers who wants to provide quotes as well. They'd be like, hey, we have better price for you and your users. Why don't you use our, inventory rent rather than accessing liquidity in AMM? So that's when we actually see, like more institutional players are coming in around 2020, 2021. Later on, we then saw that like CowSwap came out with an idea saying, hey, aggregation makes a lot of sense, but what if we also put an auction on it? And so basically now we're just not relying on one routing algorithm that's designed by 0x or 1inch, but instead it's like, hey, a group of solvers, you guys can compete to give me that best price across all the liquidity. And supposedly that should be at least the same or better than a aggregator, right? And so that's like later on when 1inch and Uniswap X, they just like starting to also copy that, kind of like design and had a 1inch fusion, Uniswap X, who are also, I would call them solver models, introducing RFQ liquidity as well. One other interesting thing is like when MetaMask, they realize we have the most of the power of the user's entry point, and we should keep them there because they are basically, using MetaMask wallet, go to some front end and swap, and the front end charges fee. Why don't we just put the swap functionality within the wallets and charge us a fee, right? And so they charge pretty high fee, but user, really is not price sensitive, and they do use MetaMask swaps within the wallet quite a lot. That's another one we call it kind of like aggregator of aggregators or meta aggregators. So pretty much fast forward to 2025, we are seeing more and more DEX are integrating across the supply chain. So not only doing all this sophisticated MEV protection on top of like the front end, but also they're working with OFA, order flow auction, similar to like MEV blocker from CowSwap or MEV share from Flashbots, where they would send their users DEX orders to an entry point where this entry point has access to a bunch of searchers. So MEV searchers will promise that they will only do background on top of your orders and extract some arbitrage, and they will refund the value that they extracted to either the application or the users. So that's basically potentially is improving the price of the DEX users again. And so that's what we're seeing now. That is like a pretty dominant trend. And also Uniswap V4 hooks that's coming up will be also very interesting. So a quiz maybe in the room is, who do you think is a DEX today has the most front-end retail adoption? Like say measured by the user requested volume. Is there any guess in the room? Pancake, wow. Uniswap. But this is on Ethereum only, so Pancake may be big on Binance. Uniswap. Okay. The, the answer is CalSwap, actually. CalSwap has the biggest volume as we can account for, like the front-end user deduped, requested volume. The blue one is CalSwap. It's hard to read here, but one caveat is we're undercounting some portion of 1-inch fusion data, but per my check, adding those back, still CalSwap is the biggest. And this is a very interesting structure I wanted to highlight, which is what we mentioned earlier, where when the front end comes in, it goes to a bunch of solvers, and then the solver will find best routing for you, submit it on chain, but they're not submitting it to a public mempool RPC. They're submitting to a private mempool, some order flow auction. For example, this one here, a lot of CalSwap solvers send to MEV blocker, who then sends to block builders. Sometimes the solver can sell the order flow to the block builder directly. And so that's basically like, PEEF off now for all the Ethereum order flow. One chart to show that problem, maybe not problem, but like that trend, is that if you count the number of transactions, you can see in the Ethereum mempool, it's less and less. So the pink here is the portion of the transaction that's in private mempool. And in the past 2.5 years, it's been growing from like 5% up to 40. And this is not even, like the most dominant chart I want to show. And this one is like a breakdown of all the order flow, number of transaction counting by like what order flow OFA are, having the market share. You can see like if you're counting each of the OFA, it's somewhat small, but a lot of the unknown are probably direct deal with block builders, around 30%. If you measure it in a different way, looking at all the retail users' DEX volume, this number is even more like dominant. You can see that like this number has gone up to 70% across all the trading volumes in the retail side are in the private mempool. And another one that I shared a few weeks ago on Twitter is that one way we measure all this order flow really is not number of transactions, but actually the gas priority fees you pay, because that's actually the economic value you're paying to proposers. So we kind of just quantify all of them generically as MEV value. And if you look at private mempool versus a public mempool, 87.5% are going to private mempool. So whatever transaction that are paying a lot of value are already captured by all these like parties. They're trying to get the exclusive deal with them, vertically integrating them. The public mempool is kind of dry, basically, you can say. And so the next topic I want to talk about is like when we talk about DEX, we want to study execution quality, but why? Every day we see all these DEX fighting on Twitter. It's like, CalSwap sub-tweet about Uniswap's execution is not as good. Uniswap data scientists to fight back, and it's 2025, we still don't know which DEX has better price. And so another thing is like if you're a user, you're trading on the front end, a lot of users still don't know that like the number they see here is not going to be the number they're getting in the wallet. The quoted price here, the USDC amount, will likely be more than what you're actually going to get. Using this mental model from 0x research a few years ago, you can see that like the price you are getting in the end actually has a lot of process, right? Like you had to pay the LP fee for the AMM pool. There is a price impact depending on how big of the trade size you have. The bigger you are trading, the higher market impact, price impact you have on yourself. And then even after you set on the quoted price at that point, then you submit it on in the mempool, you still have a lot of uncertainty. So it could be simply somebody is trading at the same direction, paid a higher gas fee, access the liquidity faster than you, so now you are having a slippage. Or you could be an MEV searcher, saw your transaction in the mempool and decided to take arbitrage and like sandwich you, and so you will have a slippage. So there is a lot of like user education there as well. One other thing that why we want to study is because we do see that like before even diving into research data, when you look at all these solver DEX auction, their market structure, they look very different. So for Uniswap X, 90% of volume were down by 2 market makers. And for 1-inch fusion is slightly better. It's like 3 market makers for 80% volume. For CalSwap, it seems like a lot more decentralized. Like there's 1 market maker, and we know it's Wintermute. And we have the next 5 indie solvers that are taking 10% each. And the question is like, is it really like more decentralized, then there's better price? The answer is yes from the study, but okay. So yeah. So this is a funny joke that's been running recently, right? Like, so Wintermute just basically holds so much token, and they will dump on you, and like whenever like market goes down, you're gonna just tag their CEO and ask what's going on. So everybody just blaming every problem on Wintermute. But one thing I want to highlight here is the silver lining is that one of the solver on CowSwap, Barter, they have been taken over to be #1 in the past 30 days. So it's no longer, the market maker is the best in terms of like market dominance as well. So that's a good trend we're seeing. Yeah, and so like sure, market maker is super competitive and they can always like dominate in terms of like the volume that they can take on top of the solver platform. But one thing we want to highlight as a fundamental is that like first of all these platforms have very different liquidity profile. For example, CowSwap, they have a lot volume are coming from AMM volume. And the Uniswap X instead has, most of them are basically market makers. And I personally think it was a strategic decision for Uniswap to introduce inventory access for off-chain market makers by introducing Uniswap X. And like the fundamental part here is that you can see that market maker are very risk adverse. So for the long tail tokens, pretty much all the volume are done by AMMs. But for the going down to the right of the chart is when the assets gets more and more major and major pair like ETH or BTC pegged pair, and they will have more and more market makers providing liquidities. So we did this study using 6 months data to compare the executed price on chain versus a naive simulation against a highest depth liquidities pool on Uniswap V2 and V3, and simply compare what's the execution improvement the solver executed transactions look like compared to the simulation. And the results looks like for USDC WETH pair, this looks like for the blue bar are all the executed price against the V2 benchmark, and all of them are positive. And especially CowSwap and 1inch Fusion has like a pretty significant price improvement for the trades that are compared against the V2. The orange one are V3 benchmark, and it looks like it's much less pronounced compared to the naive routing. And then the green bar is like a comparison to Binance Markout. But I think this chart could be misleading if we're just looking at it and say, so CowSwap is better than 1inch and Uniswap. So not really. If we look at the distribution with the trade size controlled over the x-axis, you do see that a lot of the negative comes from the super small trades, which are very noisy. And it's likely because the study had to have like a gas estimation, and the gas estimation can largely flip the results for like small trades. So we would largely say that we would want to more read into the curve that's going to the right side. And you do see that like for the V2 execution warfare, which are the blue dots, they do look like all the solver platform are executing better than a V2 pool, especially when the trade size goes bigger and bigger. Harder to outperform V3 because V3 pool are a lot more concentrated liquidity. Yeah, and then so another thing we did was to compare the Pepe WETH pair to just look at a different asset profile and how do they look like. And the results looks very different if you just compare the shape, because for V2 liquidity pool, it's actually quite, deep in terms of the Pepe pair. But V3 pool, it was like much less liquidity. And that's why the solver platform was executing way better than V3, but was harder to outperform V2. So our conclusion pretty much is it's highly depending on the asset's liquidity condition. The execution performance can be very different. And overall, all the solver DEX do perform better than naive routing, and the trade size goes bigger, they perform better. I do think this study is still very limited because we were only able to do a naive routing simulation. So I would look forward to more people who are studying this topic and trying to do maybe like comparison against a modern router like 1inch aggregator or 0x router. So to enrich the execution quality study. Some other quick charts I want to highlight is that what are the new use cases on DeFi, or like what are people doing on like DEX? This chart is showing like the breakdown of the front end of how people are trading on DEX. And pretty much the only new thing we saw in the past few years was like Telegram bots, which was a peak on the top. And a year ago, I look at this chart, I would be very excited and saying like Telegram bots is taking over. But we clearly see that this trend kind of already ended in terms of like the volume sides. And we do see that a lot of the Telegram bot trades are always like meme coin trades, long tail, small sides. And people probably won't put more than $100 in like a wallet that somebody is holding private key for you. Like we have a privacy crowd here, so I think everybody would agree with me. So yeah, but Telegram bot are not dead. They're just dead on Ethereum. And so if you look at this chart, Ethereum is only the light blue, and all the purple are Solana. So like Telegram bots are going crazy on Solana still. And we saw that earlier this year, the highest, almost like all-time high volume was around Trump coin and Libra coin. But it kind of has been dying down afterwards. But even this plateau here is projecting to $100 million annual revenue for one Telegram bot. So they're doing pretty good, and this use case still exists, just not on Ethereum. Another growing use case is that cross-chain bridging and swaps. So all these charts are separately from different bridges. Then they're doing pretty much like around 25 million, 50 million a day kind of volume. It's not like giant, but kind of pretty decent. That chart is kind of sad because that's the, I think that's the layer 0 volume chart, and there was like an airdrop snapshot. And after the airdrop snapshot, everything just kind of like dead. Somebody corrected me that like this chart might not be counting the V2 data, but I looked at their website. The shape looks similar. So I also think like a lot of this volume needs to be contested because there might be a lot of farming going on as well. Yeah, but actually when you dive in deeper to see like what are people doing for cross-chain swap, and I think it's still just the cross-chain bridging. So if you look at the trade pair that got cross-chain swapped, it's USDC to USDC or USDT to USDT or just stable to stable. People are just really moving money from one chain to another because they need to use across different chains. So yeah, I think like it's more accurate to call it a cross-chain bridging use case. So yeah. So lastly, I want to just highlight this study we have done and released recently about, like looking into L2 MEV activity. And we know that like every chain kind of market and themselves, and like this is true from some study and research that if you have a faster block time, it's likely you have less like price out of place, and right, like you have less stale price and less arbitrage opportunity. And some studies showed that LVR is proportional to like square root of block time, but you do have still a MEV problem because gas is so cheap. Now, like it's so low cost for the MEV bots to even search on chain. So what we saw, and we highlighted from like the base case study data, is that we see a lot of the MEV bots are basically checking on chain using the math function and gas to check for this liquidity pool and that liquidity pool if there is a price difference. If so, how much is the profit for the arbitrage? If the profit is positive, make the transaction. If not, finish. Check 100 different pools, finish. Use 1 million gas, did nothing maybe, and like just finish the transaction. And that is all the spam and like kind of wasted the block space because you really didn't need to use the gas space and to really like check if there's arbitrage. So yeah, this is what we saw on base. When you just look at their like gas throughput chart, they seem to scaled their gas to 35 million gas per second. But if you really categorize those like spam transactions, all the red part are spam. So like the gas, throughput really is around 20 million gas per second. So when you think about scaling L2, there's a bottleneck that is hidden by the MEV spam problems. So yeah, we invite more and more L2s to think about this problem and potentially solutions to these, because it's not only just on Base, but also on Unichain, Optimism Work Chain. Wherever there is DeFi activity and there is TVL, there is spam. So yeah, this was a GIF, but this is just one example of a block, how from the beginning of the block to the end of the block, different transactions fills in the block space, and the black line is how much gas they pay. And you can see the ratio of the block space they're taking for the spam transaction, which are red, versus the price they're paying is not in proportion either. So, like the L2s are underpricing their resources for these spam bots as well. So, I highly recommend to take a look. And when we say we're onboarding next million consumer on chain, are we really onboarding consumer or spam bots? We have to really, scale smartly. So, lastly, if anyone's interested in the topic and want to work with us, we're recruiting. So that's it. Thank you.